Hello, everyone. This is Thursday, July 14th staff meeting. We've been actually talking for 15 or 20 minutes about all sorts of fun nonsense that's totally unrelated. So now it's time to have staff meeting issues. I've got a couple of things which are interesting. Has anybody else got anything they want to cover today? No, then I'll see if I can. So as you, I used to have this, I had this guy, these very woke people. It was proto-woke, right? Politically correct is proto-woke. So I had these politically correct, very nice people say, well, don't talk about people when they aren't there. And I'm like, dude, if you want to conspire to make me a better person and make me a happier person when I'm not there, please do all the conspiring, talking behind my back you can, because it's when we complain about each other that it's not really useful behind it. So, as you know, I was like, dealing with Dr. Brad over the past year. And very recently, I was saying that it's really hard to do chains of reasoning in operational language. Chains of reasoning from first principles in operational language. And so over the past 2 weeks, some bit flip in Dr. Brad, and all of a sudden I'm in a call with him or recording something, and some long fucking chain of reasoning comes out in relatively complete sentences and relatively operational language from first principles. I'm like, where the fuck did you come from? And so the thing is, this is I used to tease Martin about this. I'm like, Martin, tell me what happened, because I don't get it. I want to know how to educate people, right? I mean, how do we get them there? Because I mean, it just seems like it's completely fucking random. I can't figure it out.
Well, I struggle with complete sentences, but I always did, and it's unrelated.
It's unrelated. Yeah, but I mean, though, Martin, the truth is you're really fucking good. I mean, come on.
Thank you.
So, and then even Luke lately, I mean, I'm saying I always criticize myself because I don't compliment Luke at all. It's because he's older, right? He's an older, mature guy. And it's like, we don't have to fawn over our peers, right? So, but Luke's shit lately is fucking phenomenal. And so, especially the near poetry you're getting to, right? Which is, it's more Nietzsche is poetic, but critical. You're poetic, but positive. So I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? Right? I mean, could somebody explain this to me so that we can turn this into a method that we can teach? And Brad said something interesting. He said, the problem was that I had to let go of my last sacred cows and be willing to see the world as it is rather than I wish it to be. He said, aside from that, it's just repetition and practice. But the thing is, he told me when he was letting go of his last sacred cows. And so I see and I just wonder, is that what we all share? Is that we just have a smaller number or we have fewer sacred cows? What is it?
Probably.
Typically, sacred cows are just the axioms that ride on your biases.
So why are we less biased?
I think that we recognize understanding your bias delivers you more opportunity than falling prey to it.
So it's an agency thing.
That's the way that I see it. And some people don't. The thing is, most people don't want the agency. It comes with the responsibility and the accountability. But you can't let the chain.
Oh, I see. So we're also not afraid of responsibility.
You can't let the chain disappear, though. That's what we're failing at, showing people that we're actually carrying you.
Yes.
All the time. All the time. All the people at the edges are carrying you all the time, and there's nothing you can do about it except be grateful. Mm-hmm. Do that, and they're not.
But I don't have a lot of responsibility in my life.
You say that. You said you're not conscientious and you don't have a lot of responsibility. I don't see that at all in you. I don't know what.
We're worthwhile to be responsible to.
What?
You don't see my life.
I don't know. You're a really fair judge of. I'm like I have a knee-jerk reaction to some stuff, and so I banned somebody yesterday from one of these things. And Martin comes back in with his usual even-tempered, well-considered, fully informed. You didn't really need to ban that guy because he was just doing this. I'm like, okay, well, apologize for me.
Well, I've changed the bot to ask people that enter the chat to write some message.
Okay.
The bots started getting through reCAPTCHA and through solving math tests.
Okay. Well, it's not that. It's that's you were being responsible. And I just don't understand what there's.
It's very easy to be responsible for a Telegram chat.
Well, okay. Well, so you limit what you're responsible for because you are responsible.
Right.
That's different, right? Right. That's different from being from saying I'm irresponsible.
We won't be responsible for certain things.
I just, it's like I don't want to be responsible for that. I just don't want to do it. Right. I mean, but that's not being irresponsible. That's just saying I won't do that well or something. Being irresponsible is trying to get the gain of something without get the benefit from something without putting the investment in it.
Yeah. It's also really easy to not be responsible for a Telegram channel.
Yes. But you maintain a leadership position with all these fucking people. It's amazing to me. I think it's great. Anyway, so the point I wanted to get at is how is we're working in a via negativa. So some of us just start out with more via negativas. Is that what it is? We just have fewer biases to overcome, or we find more, because, Brad knows this, right? I'm like, I just don't think he's going to get there, right? I didn't think he was going to get there. And of course, I'm just, doing my stupid thing of saying, well, what is causing this? And of course, I just see it as he can't form sentences, right? Because the pattern is too hard for him to adopt. That wasn't it at all. He was just gravitating towards priors, sacred cows. And the minute he gave up the sacred cows, all of a sudden the bits flipped. And so I just want to know how we get this down, because it's like who this, I don't want to, if you know who this guy is, I would like to know this Contra Fabian guy, who he really is, so that I don't lose him. Right. But this guy's got raw talent, right? On a scale I've only seen a couple of times before. This guy Deck is getting there. And I don't think he did it by working. Right. I mean, I don't want to mention too many, because what happens if you manage more than one or two is that all the ones you don't manage feel insulted. So it's like, I'd have to go through 50 or 60 names here, and get half of them wrong, of course. So some of these guys are really super talented. I'd like to know why. Why is that guy able to not? It's like, Scott Adams was saying something about engineers the other day. I've actually started listening to this guy, right? This guy, Scott Adams, once in a while, when he puts out something in there, because the pace at which he delivers stuff is kind of irritating to me. But that he does have some good topics. And he was talking about how he's talking about this subject. I just lost my train of thought.
People leveling up out of nowhere.
Shit, it was important and I lost it. It was confirmatory, and it was a confirmatory analogy by some other thinker, and it fell down because I started thinking about whatever the fuck 10 things he'd been talking about lately. Okay, great. I obviously need more coffee or something.
When you're exposed to somebody's developmental process on a regular basis, it's harder to see the smaller leaps, right?
Yes.
It's like spending time with your kids versus spending time with like your nieces and nephews. You're going to see the developmental leaps in your nieces and nephews that you never catch in your own kids because you're watching the slow incremental progress in your kids. Whereas if you see them once in a while, you're going to see, oh my God, look at that leap they just took. Because in your perspective, it was a leap from one time you engaged with them to the next. But for them, it was a slow incremental process, just like it is for everybody else.
I guess the way I notice in myself is the clarity is I notice how I make arguments, but it's what I do, right? I notice what you guys do and the progress of you guys. I mean, I'm going to tease Brandon, right? Does everybody remember when Brandon never said a sentence with more than one word in it? And all of a sudden, Brandon's making sentences.
Everyone in my life remembers that. So,
Everyone noticed that Brandon is making sentences over the past 3 months, so I notice everything in you guys because I'm extremely conscious of this thing of how do we improve, how do we establish
take their incentives to lie away from them.
I know that, but you have to tell people something
that it's hurting them.
No, you're jumping ahead.
Well, yeah, I do that constantly.
Yeah, I know. So
that's my not using sentences.
Is I want to be able to tell people, here is a list of obstacles you will have to overcome in learning this, because it's actually unlike, let's say, there's when you have to do math, right? You have to do a lot of it to internalize it, because what you're trying to, unlike what they tell you, math is a set of wrenches, basically, of different sizes that only fit certain categories of problems. And so you're trying to figure out what order to use what wrenches in order to solve a problem. And in order to do that, you have to be able to recognize a pattern, right? And so it's just, you have to develop an intuition by using it. Right? The difference is that's just hard. The problem with what we're doing is you don't want to really believe it because reality sucks. And so the resistance to people isn't just the labor to learn it. In other words, we have to teach people to for me, I focus heavily on how do I teach you to unlearn theology and philosophy you don't realize you're using, right? You don't realize that you're using. How do I clarify logic and science and first principle? How do I do that? How do I teach all? Right. So, but that's like understanding is great, but then when you try to work on this stuff, you've got to basically memorize a handful. It's not that many of ternary relationships, right? We just call them series. And then you've got to but the problem we see is that people want to justify their prior more than they want to describe reality. And that seems to be the big problem. So we get this guy. I'm going to bring up Contra Fabian again. Martin, do you know who he is really? I mean, do you know how to?
Well, I know his name because of Signal.
Okay.
That's all I know about him.
Okay, so I want to make sure we don't lose him and the other guys that have natural talent. So I want to be able to tell people, here's your journey. Does that make sense? I want to set expectations so that they recognize the barriers as they go to them. Because like Dr. Brad is always talking about this other group of psychologists he's working with, and how their problem is they think they can solve for for universal agreement. I mean, right? A via positiva. That's fucking ridiculous. I mean,
we have the only universal agreement. It's in the negative. It's in the
negative. It's negative.
Yeah. Necessary and universal and negative, and that's the only one that you got.
So they wonder why they can't get it right. Right? They wonder why they're stuck. Well, I mean, because you're trying to solve the wrong fucking problem.
Impossibility is a very difficult foe.
Yes.
I don't think they wonder why they can't get it right. They wonder how to make it so that they can get it right.
Yes, correct.
They're willing to change the whole order of the universe to be right on that one.
Right. In other words, Brand, what did you say? Impossibility is a what?
An impossibility is a worthwhile foe.
It's a worthwhile foe, yes.
I mean, it's an impossible foe, really. I'm just making a joke.
What did you say? What was it? Impossibility is an impossible foe?
Yeah,
you said so. I just quoted you a few minutes ago on something. What the hell did you say? Inevitability is a rough opponent.
Yeah.
Right? Impossibility is an impossible.
These people are fighting reality. We're offering you the limits in the abstract so you can see it. It's like, hey, these are the actual limits, and you keep bumping against them like they're going to move for you. And they're not.
You know, and it was funny. For me, I bitch and whine loudly because I'm a whiner. So I would bitch and whine about the things that I've come to understand that I don't like. Right? I don't like basically the whole female side of it. Right? I don't like having to confront that reality because I want women to be yummy moms and dads and moms and women to be on pedestals. That's what I want. And I'm fucking high. Right? I mean, it's just.
We want them to be that way naturally, and we got to make them that way.
We got to make them that way.
So we could make it easy on them to be there by like telling them the truth, but we don't. We're not interested in that.
So it's hard, right, to get over your priors, right? Your biases. But then what I found is that once you know what the truth is, it's easier to come to the conclusion that, of course, Brandon just leapt ahead of, which is, as usual, which is that, well, okay, but now how, given what reality is, how do we bring about favorability? We can't bring about favorability by false premises that people are going to behave this way without the incentives to behave that way, or the not only incentives but the education and training to behave that way. Okay, so I still don't feel like I'm making much progress on it. How do I make a list of your challenges that you're going to have to overcome?
I think it's just about making it fun and to include people in what we're doing.
Okay.
To play. People like to play. That's what they like. And they demonstrate liking that. Well, they just don't want any responsibility for the outcomes of that play. It's like, well, you could have good outcomes, right? If you played with the right people, but you don't. I find the corollary in the like the martial arts, the mixed martial arts space. It's hard to find guys that'll spar with you that won't hurt you.
Yes.
Especially if you hurt them by mistake, right? Or you better them and you're smaller.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's a lot of reasons why people get out of line. And well, it's the same in real life. Like you can't hurt the people you're sparring with. The play, the game, that's the outcome you're looking for, is to continually play the game.
Yeah, I had a karate teacher get mad at me, and I didn't even understand why. He got stopped the whole class, and he said, something along the lines of, you're not supposed to hurt I'm like, I didn't even touch you. Right? I mean, but what I was trying to do is outmaneuver him. Right? And he didn't like it. And I'm like, I don't know. Wrestling.
Another thing I like about the mixed martial arts is that it went all the martial arts that are, what do you call them? Like a dance in their extrapolation. Like they all got tested against.
They all got falsified.
What a fight actually looks like, and then the superiority, like now we have a competition of what good fighting styles look like and how to maneuver really, but it wasn't there before. It was a dance before.
I'm actually pissed that they put this whole regulations on it, because the first few years of
I remember them.
The first 2 years where I just remember the different guys, these different styles come out and they just get creamed, right? And so, it's like you need to know how to grapple, you need to know how to strike, and you got to be able to strike with all four limbs, right? And if your head, and of course, if you're like properly trained, you use your forehead too. But I thought that was wonderful falsification of all that stuff. But I mean, in wrestling, there are rules.
Yes.
And the other thing is, it's actually pretty hard to like kill somebody wrestling.
Very.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Safe, yeah.
That's why I liked it. It's like the only reason I got out of it is I don't want to be that close to other sweaty men.
Yeah, so that's an autist problem. I have that problem too.
You're just, it's just gross, right?
Because it
is. But karate, I wanted because partly because it's not being that close to that sweaty man. The same thing, I like fencing, right? I like fencing too. The problem is that you can hurt each other in karate, right? Or any mixed martial art. You can actually hurt each other. It's like boxing. I can't afford to have this thing bruised. If it's the only value I've got, can't afford to take the hit to my head. I've taken a few boxing lessons, and man, the cardio you need to box, holy fuck.
I like what it's done to the transgender movement, because you can tell the difference between a woman transitioning to a man and a man transitioning to a woman fighting women, which is assault. They shouldn't afford for that, and they did. They should stop that immediately. But it's evident the differences between men and women when they're fighting one another.
Yes. And I had you tell it to women get all out of line. If that's how you say, we're faster, we're stronger. It's not that we're a little faster or stronger.
It's a lot.
It's that 90% of men are stronger, right, than the top 50% of women, right? There's no comparison. And the speed thing becomes really obvious, right? Just so much faster. Like, I mean, in every single thing, every movement, every intuition. And I noticed it during fencing the most, because it's so subtle. I don't know if you guys have done any fencing or any sword fighting at all, but the thing about fencing is the sort of effeminate way you hold the foil. It gives you this amazing precision, but it really bothered me. I had to get used to it because I want to like grip that fucking thing, But with women, they just have they just can't, because you're just so much faster. It's unbelievable. Anyway, what was it?
Reminds me, I actually did Krav Maga, and we had, what's the correct term now? World wars.
Yes.
That was also pretty unequal. You just don't know what to do with them.
It's just wrong. I'm like, I don't mind, it's different when they're little kids, right? I mean, you're going to try to teach them stuff. But this whole equality thing, there's a good equality thing in fighting. It's called a fucking gun, right?
I mean, at least we had two of them. Well, it was man and a woman.
I see.
They were partners. So they usually be together.
Yes. I tell the story of this little French girl. When I just tricked her, and she bent my foil right around like that, right? Because it got her somewhere in here. Just bent my foil right around like that, and she just she just went total female on me, and she's French, of course. It's so fucking adorable because she's, I don't know, like 5'3" or something and 110 pounds. She just comes after me in the whole fencing garb, using her foil as a club and just trying to beat me. I'm a girl. I'm a girl. I'm a girl. And I'm like trying to defend myself, and I'm laughing so hard, right? There's tears coming out of my eyes. I can't see through the mask anyway. I got this, and everybody in the whole fucking room is just dying in laughter. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I expected. Anyway. So how did we get off on this?
I don't know. We were talking about teaching and training people.
Yeah.
Making it fun.
Making it fun. That's right.
That's actually it's flipping it around, which is the next.
Oh, we moved from food to toys for dogs.
Well, I mean, I started out writing a prosecution.
Yep.
And we're like coming around to writing something positive.
You write the prosecution first, and then you look at who it is you're prosecuting, and then you realize that it's everyone. You're like, oh, we got to thin this down just a little bit.
I was so mad when I started working on this because the more I worked on it, the more angry it made me. So, what I feel like over the past couple of weeks is that, you know how I said the problem was I wanted to start with the logic, and then I said, oh, let's start with the first principles. And everything I did was to work up to the law. But it turns out if I just start with explaining the law, I solve the whole fucking teaching problem right off the bat. And so
I'd like to demonstrate the law.
Right. Well, you know, here's what the law is, and here's why it is. And our journey is going to explain why of it. But it says up front. And so the only question I was going to ask you guys is, in my earliest drafts, I always start out with the narrative. And I start out with a narrative, that was trying to put some context together. And the narrative I first started with was why we invented this law, right? The steppe Viking pirate, right? Invention of law. And I'm not sure I like that anymore. Then I moved to what's wrong, what went wrong. And I started out with acknowledging the problem. And I said, okay, this is what went wrong. And then I worked into so I'm wondering, why don't I just start out with the law and just explain the law, state the law, and explain what it is. It starts out as a bunch of definitions, and then all the stories fit together logically to reinforce that. And I think it's sort of, I used to describe it, I want to start from the logic out, right? Or ethics in both directions. It's like, what's your starting point to tell this fucking story? And I feel like it's like, that Christopher Nolan movie Memento, where it's like the guy has no memory, and he keeps writing on his arm with impermanent marker. So when he wakes up in the morning, he has clues as to what's really going on. I was like, well, he tells the story backwards, right? The story backwards. And I'm sitting here thinking the same thing, is like, how do I tell this goddamn story? And right now it keeps coming up to me that you can actually tell this pretty simply if you just start with explaining the law. because like I've been hitting this recently where I'm like, well, it's just, what do these terms mean? And what's their goal is to produce consensus, right? I mean, you're producing what is the concurrent common natural law of cooperation between men and nations, right? What does that mean? I mean, all this was so far along in the late 1700s, and it's only been this industrial revolution in Marxism that's just led to all this shit. It's unbelievable pseudoscience. And I just keep feeling like the story's pretty short if you tell it that way. Does that make sense? And where every other way I try to tell the story, it's got to be really long, and people have to follow for a long time to get to the plot. Whereas if you tell the law up front, they get the plot of the narrative, and that's like showing the end of the movie at the beginning. And then as you travel through the movie, you begin to understand what the first scene was about, right? It just seems like, oh, that's a better way of telling it. I feel like I'm doing a bad job here, guys, is because I knew what I wanted to talk to you about in this context. I feel like it's.
Well, you're trying to talk it through.
I'm trying to talk it through and see if I can. Okay.
It makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah.
I seem to recall written somewhere that people tend to enjoy a movie more when they know the conclusion.
Yes. I just think it's asking so much. Like if I start with the logics, I mean, you're going to go through all this shit before you realize why you're even learning it. And right, it's the same thing with starting with first principles. Yeah, this is really informative. You got to do all this shit before you figure out why you're learning it.
Why they're learning it.
They're going to tell you why you're learning it. And I don't know why it didn't occur to me earlier, but because I know why. I mean, the reason is I was so emotionally agitated by this war against our civilization that I wanted to be prosecutorial. And as you know, I'm fascinated. I'm more interested in logic than I am in the rest of it. And thankfully for you guys, you guys compensate for my failure.
The anger is a useful story for people because some people are just getting to the beginning of that anger curve. That's why I know that things are going to get bad because regular people are going to act on being angry, and they're gonna be, because they're going to know what happened and that they were a party to it and that they're in a pinch they can't get out of. I'm trying to save them all that heartbreak. I mean, that's what all authors spend you've been working on this problem for like 40 years.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how long is it going to take someone to read a book?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a lot of time to put into one thing. Parsimony is a favor. This is how you get out of the way of reality in the future. The one that wants to harm you.
So I'm gonna. The preface to a book is supposed to be the author's story of why he wrote it, right? The introduction of the book, if you're going to have one, is supposed to be a summary of the book. And then the book is just your argument, right? Your argument through it. And I think we just start with
the only thing missing in there. So we have why you wrote it and we have what it's going to do. We don't have why they're reading it. Why is it important for them to read it?
I think I have that though. Where do I have that?
What problem is it solving for them?
Right. Let me just make a note of that.
Tell them they can't afford not to.
But they have been, so they won't believe that.
Why you wrote it.
They certainly have been. Why are they going broke though?
The summary of it.
They're being told they're going broke right now, but they're still living their lives. So that's why this stuff's hard to believe.
The reason you want, what did you say? The reason they're reading it?
Yeah, the reason they're reading it. We have your reasons. We have the existential reasons, but we don't have their reasons.
And they presumably had some reasons already if they're reading it.
Maybe before we can make any argument, we have to make attention to that argument first. That's always the first argument, is pay attention to the argument I'm about to make.
Okay, so I'm going to do this as...
I like to frame it as a case. We're not arguing. We're making a case for you, for your future. We're giving you the opportunity to make a case for yourself. One that has the possibility of persistence.
So what if I start out with group strategies, a simple overview of group strategies, right? And leading to the civilizational strategies, right? That I need to put an evolutionary context around it. And then once I've got that, I go into, so what is this thing we call law?
Yeah, what does law solve?
Right. It's a method of organization.
Why does law mean you're not dead?
Why does law mean you're not poor? I mean, I just watched a fucking video on one of the African states this morning, the economic, and it makes me want to fucking cry. Because there's a path there's one path. You can try lots of other things,
right?
But every other path will fail.
Yeah, it's narrow.
It's a narrow path. You have to produce a nation, right? A clan. It has to produce a military. The military has to indoctrinate men into the commons, responsibility for the commons and a hierarchy of duty. They have to impose law. They impose law because it will produce an economy necessary to finance that military. Right? And in order to do that, they need to produce a bureaucracy that's not corrupt. And the law is there's one way. China can do it. Why couldn't India? Couldn't do it. China built a military. What did the West do? We are a military. There's nothing but a military. Right?
Used to be.
Well, okay, right.
There's lots of buts.
Thank you for the painful correction. The lament, but the Middle East could never produce one, right? They still can't.
The insight, though, that we are a military, it's an important one, because where has cooperation been most successful? in the West, right, where everyone's the military, right? Yes. Cooperation doesn't get bigger than your capacity for violence, right? The only one that's not directly attached, not proportional to the others, is avoidance, right, or boycott. We can avoid everyone all the time.
I actually think, here's how I frame it. Tell me how this goes. Is that the difference is that you are due respect regardless of your rank if you do your duty. Now that we did it as a military, the Chinese did it as extended family, the Hindus did it as castes, or with it as castes, and the Middle East did it as cults, and Africa couldn't get their shit together. And they can't. It's not their fault. I mean, it's just a vast fucking continent with terrible geography, isolated from the rest of the world patterns of trade. And so, I mean, duh, it's not their fault. I mean, you go back to Africa couldn't get together. Well, shit, Austronesia went fucking backward. It lost fire in some places. I mean, Jesus Christ. So sorry, Luke. I went off on a. You were trying to take me somewhere that was
no. Our capacity for cooperation can only ever equal our capacity for violence. So where we find the most cooperation is where we find the most martial people.
Or is it more that it's the organization of violence by violence is the foundation by which all other organizations have to be produced?
The organization of violence by duty.
Right. It's by
violence
duty.
Against failing those obligations.
One of the things that you notice if you go back in history is the respect people get for military, despite the fact that many of them don't deserve it. Maybe the Romans did the best job of it, actually. Because if you were a Roman, it was a career. You were Roman, so it was a career, right? And you got land and all sorts of responsibility and influence once you were done with your service. It's not that it's even, I don't know. All right, so I'm off track. Can I get back on my? I'm trying to think this through. You guys are helping me. I think we're making progress, which is why you wrote it, the summary of it, the reason they're reading it, the argument, the historical context, the group strategies, and then from those group strategies, what does law solve and why? It's the same reason Christianity turns out to be useful in the West, is that the aristocratic method of war is just not going to take the female population with it, right? Unless there's an other that the female population is trying to, like the aristocracy, keep at arm's length. So the minute that you're trying to enfranchise other people, Christianity says you can have respect for doing your duty, where you're doing your duty is not doing harm. Right? I mean, it's the hospitaliers of the military, right? I mean, what is religion but a promise of mindfulness in exchange for a promise of non-aggression? Except for Islam, which is a promise of aggression. Okay. Well, that was my big question. Okay, can we go to now let's ask this question. Brandon, you said the law. Okay, so what does this solve? Now there's a question of, that's the science of it, right? Now there's the problem of what's the problem with our current condition? And then how do we, I just answered my question. I'll say, how do we introduce the problem of why we are having a problem now, which is really quite simple in the end, is we haven't suppressed the female into the industrial age as thoroughly as we suppressed male reciprocity in the industrial age. And we're just falling behind in suppressing the female, like even though we had previously suppressed it just fine. So what's the hard, that's the fundamental issue, right? And so how do I, or do I just avoid that entirely and just say no, I don't think I can avoid it. I don't think I can avoid it. So there's like, okay, so yeah, I like this. So we tell them up front what we're going to do. We put this historical context. We talk about what the law is and why it's so important, right? It's so effective. We've made the case because of group strategies and economic conditions. Then we say what we have to correct. And then we go into the logics of how we correct it. And then all the tough stuff is at the back, right? We don't have to walk everybody through all this logic and epistemology in the beginning in order to get to it, right? Because that's what I keep getting frustrated by. I keep going through this and I'm like, no one's going to fucking follow me through this journey. From the, if I build it structurally, right, from the bottom up or the top, it's, the good stuff is like way at the end. What we want is the good stuff we want the good stuff up front, right? And then we can tell how to do it at the back. And I feel like I'm losing you guys, but no. Yes, I like that. So start with the logic. Nope. Start with first principles. Nope. Start with ethics. Nope. Start with the fucking origin of the context of the problem. Lead up to law, and then everything else is just increased precision. In other words, if you get through the first quarter of the book, you've got it, right? And that's what we're trying to get to.
You should be mad enough to want to read the rest.
All right.
I think you should just write it and then figure out how to order it.
Well, I have written most of it, right? The question is, what's the flow? Like as a first draft, it's there. The problem is when I look at the first draft, it's like, I'm not getting what I want here. I want to get buy-in up front, because trying to drag people through epistemology, that's not a popular book. What I want to do is create the story, and then, because it's really a couple of sections, right? It's the story, right? What we're trying to solve and why it solves it. It's the technical part, which is the logic and the first principles, and it's the remedy, which is the Constitution. Now I can actually do it as the problem, the Constitution remedy, and the explanation, and that's the order people are going to care about. Right? I mean, that seems like it. So I've been pretty consistent, is that I was clearly stuck. Brad helped me get unstuck. The reason I was stuck is that how do you tell this? Because look at the scope. We're talking about everything. We're not talking about like one thing. We're talking about everything. It's as big a leap as science over philosophy. It's a huge fucking leap. And it's counterintuitive, and you don't want to face it. I mean, I go back, Darwin was a basket case after what he learned, because he didn't want it to be true. I'm kind of in the same position. I wish it wasn't fucking true.
Well, isn't the conclusion that everything is actually just one thing?
Just explain that, because I don't know which way you mean it.
Continuous recursive disambiguation.
Ambiguation of, yes, that's it.
Are two things, because there's the opposite pole of this continuous recursive ambiguation.
Yes, yes.
Entropy.
Yes. It's exasperating.
I would take it one step further and say that the actual one thing we care about is survival of continuous recursive disambiguation.
So survival by or continuous
and survival of, it'll kill you if you ignore it.
The universe
it will ambiguate you.
Yes. God may be merciful, but the universe is not.
You know, that's one of the biggest problems we run into is we read history backwards. We start from where we are and look back instead of starting at the very beginning and reading forward.
Yes.
Right. The whole universe is trying to kill us. It has been from day one.
Yes.
from the first man that took the first step. Right?
It's so horrible, isn't it?
Right. And all we've done since then is layer protections on that. We can't make the universe safe. What we can do is learn how to navigate it safely.
Yes.
And that's what we're doing in this process. And everybody working against us is trying to return us back to that dangerous universe. And that's what we're fighting against.
So why is that? My belief is is that because they can't trust each other, and they can't trust each other because they have the wrong institutions, right? And without getting people with the right institutions to create the right incentives and the right policies, it's hard to trust each other. And worse, it's one thing for Europeans to be distracted as we are being by the second time. It's another thing to take a culture that's sort of only half wrong, Chinese, right? So take another culture that's only half wrong, the Hindus, and then take a culture that's completely wrong, which is the Middle East, or a culture that just has to go down the whole fucking journey, Africa, and try to drag others through this process. Because it turns out that relearning is harder than learning.
Everyone complains that they're in a competitive race, but a bunch of people ran out ahead and then came back for you.
Yes.
And you're dragging them down as they're trying to help you through.
All right.
It's not a competition. You're being stewarded.
Okay. All right. I have my answer. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? Well, Kurt, I know what Martin says. Just get the fucking thing done. Yeah, but it's like I started out with well over 1,000 pages, right? I think I got it down to like 400, and now I think I can get it down to a couple of hundred, right? And it's relatively easy to understand. Whereas before it was like, this is too hard on people.
Just remember that the second edition is always going to be better than the first.
Yeah.
So
I can't think of I'm trying to turn that into a sexual reference somehow, and I just can't. All I keep thinking about is that either BMW or Aston Martin ad where the chick's making coffee, and she's got the guy's white shirt on, and he's saying, "Yeah, you aren't the first, but it's still worth it." I don't know who made that ad, or I don't even know if it was a real ad, but if I were the ad agency for that brand, I would have absolutely positively leaked that video or that ad, and made sure it was untraceable back to me, because the value he added to the brand was priceless. But he needed plausible deniability.
That's when you want it traceable back to you.
No, because you want plausible deniability in that case. Otherwise, because if the shit comes against the company, then you're going to get fired, because really ad agencies are disposables, right? Ad agencies are like hookers. You don't keep them. All right. Are we done? This is extremely useful for me. Thank you. It was a lot of fun too. Anything else? We're good? All right, guys.
I had that question last week about defining purpose of man and woman that may not be replaced.
Can you restate that?
I just find that message. Our goal is increasing agency of humans. Many new technologies have increased it by outsourcing it. We don't need so much muscle power, so much memory, so much ability to calculate, because we have tools that can do all those things better than we can. Vaccinations and medicine means our natural immune systems don't have to perform as well. My contention is that if we don't put some limits in place, there is no reason not to replace every human function with something that can do it better, eventually including making decisions and acting on them. At worst, getting humans completely replaced, at best turning them into some blobs that have no need of any agency because everything's taken care of. So I believe we need to define a purpose of man and woman with production of something that replaces them in their purpose, treated as a crime, and the same by another state as an act of war. What we want humans to be.
Yes, that's the underlying question. What do we want to be? Of course, I don't see the post-human path I don't see that happening. We're going to need robots to do things simply because humans can't occupy much of the universe's space without dying.
Well, what do we do?
Hold on. So I'm trying to bound the problem, right? So there are things where we need AIs and robots for, right? But I actually view them more like how the ancients treated the slaves and animals, right? There were things that they need. And the reason is that we're energy bound, right? I mean, evolution is the history of the increasing conservation of an accumulation of energy. And so we're sort of energy bound, and in order to, there's no limit to the amount of energy we are going to want to control, and our bodies are too frail to do that. In all of history, every time we offload something, right, it does produce a fragility, right? It produces a fragility. On the other hand, it lets us seize an opportunity. So, I mean, the question is, what is the human being liberated to do? Right? Is that human being liberated to become what's that? There's a cartoon or movie where people are like they've lost their bone structure. They're just fat blobs on this spaceship that are driven around by
Wally.
What?
Wally.
Wally, is that what it is? Right.
Yes.
Well, that's a great thing. I think that you would want to say we would want to continue evolution, right? So I mean, there's transhumanism in the sense of becoming machines, which I think is I don't see the. I'll tell you what I do see as a risk, and then there's transhumanism in the sense of we evolve. In the sense that it would be very interesting if we could take, because we have a guy who we have the genes of a guy who can consume lactic acid as soon as it's produced, so he can run marathon after marathon after marathon. We have women who can see more colors than men can see, right? We have people who have extraordinary lung and heart capacity. We have people who are less vulnerable to certain cancers. We have people who know how to live longer because they have, longer telomeres. So there's all sorts of these things that we could improve ourselves with. And reality is there's no reason a biological organism should die. There's probably some problem you run into with the brain, and that it runs out of adaptive capacity. In other words, because there's not enough free neural connections to form new associations. But we don't know that. It's possible that the brain can keep forming new dendritic connections and reconnections eternally. So I think we would get kind of boring because we would know pretty much how everything, I mean, like you could become these people, like we're adults, right? And we can see deterministically how processes are work. So at some point you become one of those people that is like, well, it doesn't matter because it's always going to turn out this way anyway. So, but then there's the problem that the author of that argument is making out, which is that we're offloading cognitive responsibility. And that scares me a bit. So it's just say, I have greater access to information. If I have greater access to information, if we're, you'll say our group is successful and we normalize the parsimony of the unification of the sciences, so that, right, that would have as profound an impact on mankind as did the scientific revolution, and almost as profound an effect on mankind as the revolution in writing. It will have a huge impact on mankind. So yeah, sure, we could do that. Now, so the question is, what do we have to do if evolutionary pressure, right, and survival pressure are limited? Well, you have to direct it toward creativity, right? Or else it either goes to hedonism.
To maintain adversarialism.
Right.
It's the only way to stay alive is to adapt to this place under harsher and harsher conditions. Luke was talking about his affliction, the sleep thing, right? His body is traumatized into a superpower now that he can sleep well. Because he's going to be able to run on less sleep because he abused himself for so long.
Sorry.
So we can do those types of things in an optimal fashion, or people can choose to do those things in an optimal fashion. And we should do those types of things at scale. We're talking about the law. The law says you need to steward self-determination by self-determined means. You can't make humans less agentic through time and do that.
Okay, you've actually, I don't know if I have the brains to do it right now, but you've actually identified to getting from what Martin said to what you said. I can't do that path right now. I think I need lunch. But I can see it's there. So the answer to Martin's question is, we have to create an aspirational vision of mankind, and we have to falsify
which is what was his question, right? Like, what do men and women produce? Right? Children with more agency than they had.
They have, yes, exactly.
They have to. The next generation has to be better than the previous ones against the worst conditions, and then whatever can come out.
What is the worst? I mean,
we can always be delivered to where you have to use fire, and that's where Luke comes in. Like, the power grid can go out. It's still that fragile.
Yeah, I mean, we just need one more scary volcanic event, or one more scary what do you call a meteor?
An asteroid.
An asteroid.
Impact.
An impact event. Thank you. I mean, one more. I mean, it's the same fucking thing. A dramatic release of energy that destabilizes the world. You know, billions of people will die, right? I mean, because by all this exporting we've done, we've created fragility, right? Well, we've also created adaptability.
Yes.
All right. So I don't know. I mean, the answer, I think the answer is, we got to get off of dependence upon a universe that's trying to kill us, which is how Luke started this out, right? The universe is trying to kill us. We have to get to a position where the universe can't kill us, which is going to take a while, right? And
my question is for a very long-term future, which is what I think we're writing law for.
We're writing
anything that produces the conditions of dependence rather than convenience, I think is a problem.
Yes.
When it comes to technology. So if a human being that can exist without it becomes dependent upon it, then it's violated that human being's ability to reciprocate along that path of dependence or along that path of survival. So
we don't have an impetus to remain compatible with anything other than one another. So the technologies can't be used in a way in which we need them if they can fail us. We teach cooperation from the bottom up. So if things go bad, like, you can make optimum decisions given the destitute position you're in, because you've only got what you got. But you got to get there first, or you just die when things happen.
Yeah, let's if we came across a parent who every time their child stood up to try to learn to walk, they pushed that child down, what would we call that?
Abuse, torture.
Technology that does the same thing is abuse and torture. We talked about that movie. The guys, they float around. They don't even have the ability to walk on their own. That's a technology that introduced a dependence rather than introduced a convenience or a force multiplier, right?
Yeah,
right. That's actually you force something that deprives you of a burden in exchange for the seizure of additional opportunity is different from a depriving of a burden that prevents you from seizing other opportunities. Right? I mean, the question is, are you growing?
Right. If the only solution to an intervention is an additional intervention, then that original intervention was wrong.
Okay. So now that's good for us competent folk. Now, what happens to the incompetent folk?
We get better, they will. We're not capable of taking care of those who are dependent on us currently, so they drag us down. Or we don't demonstrate being able. We lose people every day. They're unfit, they're unsure, they can't choose. They're dependent on everyone around them for everything, thinking, feeling. There are very fragile people being raised. There are very fragile people running things, frankly.
So, Martin, I have to think about this for like 6 months.
Think about it while you're writing the book.
That's pretty short time for perhaps an eternal problem.
I mean, the problem set is narrow, right? I mean, but I don't see how you get away from. I mean, here's the other answer. Man is just as the cell was an intermediary. I would say between the cell was an intermediary between the sexes, just as the reptiles are intermediary between the mammals, just like apes are intermediary between humans and mammals, just like humans might be an intermediary between a mechanical life form. In other words, the life form is not so fragile. That doesn't mean.
Well, my preference is that we are not.
No. I'm trying to falsify it. So the answer is that that I don't know why we would not be extinct under that scenario. Whereas we as humans, we are, especially if we're nearly immortal, and we are we have an average IQ of, let's say, 115 to 140. and we are extremely fit, and etc. And all of that's achievable. And men and women's job is to produce increasing agency or competency between generation. I don't know why there's any limit to combining man with robots, or artificial intelligences, as long as man does not give up responsibility. I don't, that's the,
yeah, I am worried about that if there is no demand for responsibility.
Right. You can't have responsibility over something you're dependent upon.
I mean, there have to be rewards for responsibility.
Okay, so the problem with, okay. I'm going to have to work on this one a bit. I mean, science fiction authors addressed every one of these fucking permutations between the 40s and the 90s, right? There's no unaddressed one of these questions. The answer, the reason we don't have an answer that we're sitting here talking is because we know what's possible, but we don't know what human incentives will do under those conditions. And so there may need to be a law that retains incentives to keep mankind alive, right? Now, maybe rules. And there may need to be basically religion of man. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to outthink the 20 million guys who have thought about this problem for the past 60 years, right? I'm not going to do it in sitting here. I'm not that smart.
There's another issue. That if we remain multiple states and those that retain its responsibility or whatever cannot compete with those that outsource everything to robots.
Compete at what? Outcompete at what?
Yeah, compete at what is a great question.
Survival.
I guess survival of what? I mean, we take for granted that we have to navigate the world in the West as it exists now. But we can walk away from the cities and get away from a lot of that by choice. So.
What we have for robots right now are profoundly fucking stupid cockroaches. Right.
No.
Right. If we get to the point where we solve the energy density problem of the batteries, we have to solve that. That's actually the big problem. The second thing is we have the way we think of intelligence today, or AIs today, is they're dependent upon vast computers who do all the pre-calculations for them and then redistribute the pattern recognition programs. It's an extremely slow process. If we were to fix those really processes, there's just no way a human can compete with a robot. The only advantage we have is we're a 100-watt problem and they're like a kilowatt problem. So
what if we end up replicating basically a human brain with same energy requirements?
There's a, how do I say this really? My God, what a rat hole that'll take me down. The reason we can think is because our electrical reactions are slow. And so the recursion buys time.
Yeah.
The problem with mechanical devices is that they have to create virtual wires, not neural connections. Does that make sense? They have to create virtual connections. We might be able to get the energy down, but it's we've run up against limits already, physical limits already. And as far as I know, beating Apple's M1 chip is going to be, I think that's probably the limit, just like the 4 nanometer or whatever it is we're running at is getting down to a limit. So there would have to be some way of solving that problem, because the AIs are only faster than we are today because of pre-calculation. They're not actually faster. They're faster because of pre-calculation. In other words, training is incredibly burdensome. And so I don't, I want to see how Musk's new robot, which is walks instead of has tires, works. They solve the embodiment problem, but as far as I can tell, they still have the computation problem. Now, if we manage to solve that problem of energy density and a rate of adaptation, that's the difference. We adapt quickly to multiple circumstances. They adapt slowly to a single task. Does that make sense? And so the math of that's pretty terrifying. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to do it because it's so complicated. But so I'm not.
What are they going to outcompute and compete us at? That's my question.
Like, anything that's repeatable.
Sure, but if you install the law, they can't do anything bad.
No,
like, all the permutations are good.
In the end, see,
What if another state doesn't do that?
No, that's correct. That's correct.
I didn't get what he said.
Well, not all. I mean, if you're China, you're not going to do that,
Oh, correct.
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, the moral license to lay your enemies low is in the law too.
Yes.
We have problems to solve, but they're not going to be solved in one.
Right. So the war problem will lead to the war things, but the problem with war things is you don't want them to have creative initiative, right? If they did, they wouldn't go do it, right? I mean, remember that we have a really simple thing, homeostasis, right? And so we're trying to stay alive by acquiring shit, right? And so fundamentally, we're selfish. We only cooperate because it's more useful than not.
We want to stay alive at a decreasing cost.
Right. We want to stay alive at a decreasing cost. And because we evolved to favor that cooperation, right? We have some nice biochemistry that keeps us biased that way. But a machine isn't going to have that. And a machine needs a means of decidability.
It doesn't have a value hierarchy.
It doesn't have one. Correct. You have to give it one. And so
that I see as the problem with AI, frankly.
That is the problem with AI.
Like, what are they looking to acquire?
Now, if they're just looking to acquire fulfillment orders, and they understand property like we do, except that they understand property like we do instead of property like the law does, which basically means if I don't own it or I don't have permission to use it, it doesn't exist and I can't think about it. Right? Then
what if somebody makes a robot that understands property like communists does?
They'll try to wipe us out, the robots. That's what will go down.
Well, but the answer is there's always, so there's two different, I tried to make this earlier and I wasn't clear enough. The war will always happen and it will always require technological parity. It's also self-canceling, Right? That I don't see that as a problem precisely for that reason. The question is, what about the stuff we want to use for other than war? In other words, those are war machines. What about the other machines we use? Because it doesn't do us any good to have you and me hooked into a war machine. We're actually not.
So basically, Patrick Ryan is right on robot nationalism.
Say that again?
Pat Ryan has a video on robot nationalism. Basically this.
What is his theory? I don't know.
Well, that we're gonna end up with robots fighting each other.
Yes. And so that's the logical conclusion, because humans can't do it. And the primary problem with warfare is humans have a survival instinct. I mean, so what all happens with robot warfare is this technology and resource race, which is basically economics. I mean, that's just, in the end, that's, what does that mean? That means, what's the rate of your energy conversion of your civilization? I mean, I published this freaking graph just the other day, just to make this point, is that quality of life is just a rate of energy consumption. That's it. If you want to look at GDP, it's just energy consumption per capita. So, I mean, it's the same thing with future wars of robots. Once you get rid of the problem of incentives, which robots do, then it's just pure fucking energy conversion, right? And that's all that matters. So, however, that's the war. The robot nationalism is kind of cute. I like that term. But underneath that, I mean, it's not necessary that robots would become oppressors. We'd have to make them become oppressors on purpose, because they have no means of choosing.
Well, I can think of some people that would choose to make them that way.
Just like other people will choose to find and kill those AIs. I mean, it doesn't.
We should find and kill the people building them.
Yeah, we just find, if you make that, it's just a death sentence. I mean, it's, and the problem with is it takes people and robots to make that shit, right? So at some point, you've got somebody liable in there, and to just make it a death sentence. I kind of am big on I really like the Dune thing, which is they've had their robot war, right? I mean, I thought that book is pretty smart.
Butlerian Jihad, yeah.
And of course, they ban robots. They ban machines that mirror the mind of man. Now, they take it too far, which, like, there's no computers. Well, at least they pretend there's no computers. That's just not possible. But if you were to say that a robot may not have independent choice, they're done. I mean, even the 3 laws is pretty good beginning. But I mean, I've just said this stuff. We've written, if you take what we've done here and you write it down, which is demonstrated interest, right? And you have object recognition, which is what the easiest thing is. I mean, most people have that down. You have that. Then a moral robot is trivial, right? Moreover, identifying an immoral robot or AI is trivial. So, I mean, the problem, I see this as a war, like you, right, Martin? I don't see it as an inevitability that we're going to become victims, because you can always create a robot that can kill the other kind of robot. I mean, it's the same shit. It's no different from this shit we have today with cyber espionage, right? I mean, everybody's just, I mean, the goddamn number of bots out there that are trying to get away with shit is unfucking believable. I mean, just out of China and Russia.
Yeah, but in the process, existential risks are constantly increasing.
So again, existential risks are constantly increasing?
Yes.
The more energy under control of more AIs and more robots under a smaller number of people with adverse incentives increases. Yeah, I mean, it's like nuclear weapons. What's the difference?
Yes.
It's no, I mean, it's just another weapon. I mean, it's no different from any other weapon. It's just as weapons. I mean, it's the reason we're free is because of the phalanx, the chariot and the arrow, the phalanx and the spear, the musket and the ball, right, and the rifle and the bullet. I mean, that's why we're free.
I can see that, but the risk of nuclear Armageddon is non-zero.
Correct. The risk of our nuclear Armageddon, the risk of a robot Armageddon is non-zero.
Yes.
The risk of plague is non-zero. The risk of volcanic action is non-zero. The risk of asteroid or impact is non-zero. And the risk of climate is non-zero. And I don't even mean without our intervention in it. The fucking planet turns into an ice ball relatively regularly, damn near kills everything on it. So, there's only one way, and we call it the OODA loop, which is you get ahead of the maneuver adaptive capacity of your enemy. The way we get ahead of the adaptive capacity of the universe, frankly, is to build robots that can be our slaves to help us make it off the dirt ball. That's the
thing that drives it is the same thing that limits it. It's the will to live.
I think our bias towards life is our sacred bias, frankly.
I mean, that answers Martin's question. When there's only, in the end, there's what provides decidability? Survival. What provides intergenerational survival? Competency, agency. What decides the long term, which is human survival? I mean, I don't know why that isn't a natural law.
The premise of that question in the beginning was that perhaps survival isn't enough.
Well, right. So here's the outlying example is, okay, we feel really great because every time we explore the world, we find more resources. We went out and we did a little exploration of the space, and we found this thing called a galaxy, the Milky Way. And we were like, wow, this is the universe. And all of a sudden, we had these guys come along, Hubble and what else. By the way, these galaxies are sort of like sparks at the fireworks festival. There's just lots of these fucking things. And space is really this universe that we see, maybe there was a big bang or whatever. This is 94 billion light years across. It's fucking huge, right? And by the way, we actually don't know if that's the universe, the way we don't know the galaxy was the universe or the solar system, the universe, or the planet of the universe. We don't know that because it's quite possible, it's more likely that maintaining a persistent universe consists of multiple instances of universes and a constant adversarial competition, which never equalizes. So there's probably lots of universes, and ours is actually a small one because it's young and still relatively hot. Okay, great. Now, what happens when you say, well, the answer is that we can't, I don't know this, by the way, and I've come around quite a bit, is at our current level of knowledge, we don't know how to move faster than light. Which means we can never get out of this fucking universe, right? Which means it's eventually going to have heat death. So why bother? Because we don't know. That's why. We'll never know, right? So the only thing we can do is try. It's sort of like communism. Come on. I spent about a minute preparing to come to that conclusion and deliver that line, and I expected an even better reaction than I got.
That was actually pretty funny.
So yeah, there's reasons to give up, but the truth is that the only way we know is to try. My current opinion is that the movement of mass through the quantum background, limited to the speed of light, that might not be the hard limit that we.
Well, there was that guy on Good Dudes who claimed you just need to use some amount of static electricity to basically make ether get out of the way.
Right. I mean, essentially, that's the problem. The issue is the energy density of the quantum background is either very small or there's an error in our calculation and it's holy shit high. Right. And so we don't know that quite yet. If it's really that low, we should be able to find some way to displace that because there's some organization to it. Right. It may just take us a long time. So I don't think it's time to give up on faster than light anything, because there seems to be the ability to move extraordinary. The universe has properties that seem to be able to move very, very quickly when they don't have to account for the quantum background. So I don't know. We're going to see. I cut myself off there because I'm like, I don't want to go into this rat hole. So sorry if I did that. But anyway, okay, that was really useful, Martin. Now we got to think about that fucking thing.
Yeah, but now I feel like a nerd who held up an entire class because of his questions.
And?
Nice job, nerd.
All right. I love you guys. Thank you for this meeting. I got a lot out of it. Appreciate it.
Always happy to talk to you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.